Hello class, and welcome to week 2 of your doctoral program. I know for some of you it's probably a lot of work right now. I remember when I went through mine, it was like, what is happening right now? There's so much work involved that sometimes you don't even get to enjoy the process. And I do apologize for that, but that is kind of doctoral work, and I don't want to do you a disservice because it will be like that for most of your program. By the time you get to specializations, it tends to kind of slow down for you. I do want you to enjoy the process though, and I do want you, sorry, there's a bunch of sirens that decided to go off right when I started to talk. Apologize for that. But I do want you to enjoy the process as much as possible, and that's why each week I kind of have different kinds of assignments so that you're not always doing exactly the same thing. The discussions don't change too much, and I just want to remind everybody, if you're not doing the research in the discussions, you will be marked down, so make sure you are getting in there and doing that. But I want to talk today just about some definitions that maybe we have that we don't always give the right definitions to. I think it really will help you in your leadership as you start to understand yourself. We're really going to talk about self a lot because having that moment where you kind of reflect of where you are is very important, so you don't hurt people. If you're in leadership, it's very important that you don't ascribe some kind of bias or start to discriminate against different people based on what you know about that person because of what group they belong to. And so as leaders, we have to learn to reflect on those things so that we don't do those things. It's really easy to assume something of someone just because of how they dress. And believe it or not, studies have shown that dress actually has more to do sometimes with a bias than the color of someone's skin or the gender that they are. How they present themselves has a huge ability to affect people. So there's this video that I often will show, and I don't know if I put it in the class or not. I'll have to look. Where a little girl, and she's a little white girl. I can't remember where she's from, like Russia or something like that. I don't remember. But she's dressed really nice, and they send her into a restaurant, and she kind of sits at people's tables, and they're super kind to her, and they're joking with her and loving on her. And then they have her go change into like a homeless outfit and make her all dirty and everything. And then she goes into the same restaurant, and everybody's like hugging their purses tighter and calling for the waiter to come get her out of the restaurant. And it's all based on how she looks or presents herself. And so, right now I'm wearing a t-shirt. I'm not dressed in a suit. I mean, that could obviously cause someone to think differently of me than maybe they would if I was wearing a suit. And the reality is I have a doctorate, but maybe I don't look like I have a doctorate right now. And, and you can put your bias on what I'm wearing, and so that's something that we have to work not to do. And so I'm going to go through these different definitions, and I'm going to do it in a kind of a weird way because I don't want to offend anybody. So, they always say if you're going to talk about these sorts of concepts, that you should always do it about yourself. So I'm going to do about myself and my background. So my background, both of my grandmothers were Okies. They're from Oklahoma, and believe it or not, in the 1900s, Okies were discriminated against a lot. They were stopped at the California border because they were considered white trash, and they would not allow them into California. And so my grandmothers, both my mom's mother and my dad's mother, they both got to California, because I'm from San Diego. They both got to California because they married military men, and that was the only way they could get into the state of California. And so there was some discrimination against them. And so I'm going to use my Okie background as just kind of a way to show you how these different definitions would work in my scenario. So starting with a stereotype. A stereotype is based on some truth, but not fair to all. So it's a widely held but fixed and oversimplified idea or image of a particular type of person or thing. So we all have, stereotypes are typically based on some sort of truth, right? And the truth is, a lot of Oklahoma people were very poor. Okay, a lot of them were white. you know, but to say that they were trash, it's not fair, right? And so that is that based on some truth, but not fair to all. And there were some people in Oklahoma that actually had a lot of money. And so to say that all Oklahoma people were poor white trash is not fair. It's a stereotype. It's putting some sort of, definition on them that is not fair to all. So that's a stereotype. And in all fairness, we have stereotypes about everybody. You have stereotypes about what you think professors are like. You have stereotypes about what you think someone who works in a tire shop maybe, or somebody who works at the dump, and that stereotype is not fair. You have stereotypes about people's age, about people's races and genders and all of that. We have stereotypes about everything. And yeah, there's a little bit of truth to them. And that's, a lot of comedians like to pick on stereotypes because of there being just a little bit of truth about those things, and so it's not fair to say that all, X, Y, and Z people are like that, because it's not true. There are people out there. And so it's a fallacy. A stereotype is basically a fallacy. It's attributing something that is not fair to a people group. And so we have to be careful about that. Prejudiced is just an opinion. So if you say someone's prejudiced, it is an opinion that they have, not based on reason or actual experience. So in other words, you may have never met an Okie in your entire life, but yet you've heard about them. So you've based an opinion on them that is not from an actual experience or has any reason based on it, right? It's just something that you have formed. And it's definitely a fallacy. Also, prejudice is a fallacy because you don't have real actual experience with that person. So when you say someone is prejudiced, it's something they were taught probably by their parents, or it's not something they really know for themselves. They've never actually experienced themselves. So it's important that you understand the difference between these different definitions, because we often attribute the words to the wrong thing. And so not everybody is prejudiced, okay, about a certain thing. Because maybe they have experienced it. And so if they've experienced it, there's something else that comes into play, which I'll talk about in just a second. But if they've never had that, there's no reason to why they don't like that thing. So they might have experienced it, but their reason for not liking that person is not based on a reality. It's something that they're just struggling. Maybe that, they saw this one Okie one time chewing with her mouth open. And so now they think all Okies chew with their mouth open. It's not based on reason. Or you've decided that you don't like Okies just because of what your mom said about them. She had one bad experience with them in a grocery store a long time ago. It's not based on reason. And now she's told you about them. So now if you ever come in contact with them, you don't want to deal with them, right? That's prejudice. So it's just an opinion. Prejudice does not hurt anybody yet, okay? It's when they act on that prejudice that it becomes something else, and that's a problem. We'll talk about that. So the next definition is bias, okay? It's an unfair thought process, okay? So prejudice, we said, was an opinion. Now, if you take it to the next level, it says in favor or against one thing, person, or group compared to another, usually in a way that's considered unfair. So we all have biases. You cannot say you don't have a bias. There is always a bias that we have. You do certain things, you act certain ways because of your bias. And so if you formed an opinion about something, that's your prejudice. And now you are actually in favor or against that person. Your opinion has now become a thought process that you actually are starting to work towards, which can take you to discrimination. This is the action. This is when it becomes more than just what's in your head. It's one thing to have an opinion. It's one thing to have an unfair thought process. It's another thing to actually act on that, which is discrimination. So discrimination is unjust treatment of somebody, an unjust treatment of or different categories of people, especially on the grounds of ethnicity, age. Oh my goodness, my computer just tried to go out on me, which is where my notes are. Hold on just a second. I don't know why that happened. Okay, sorry. So let me go back to discrimination. Discrimination is unjust treatment. It is an unjust treatment or of different categories. So ethnicity, age, sex, or disability. So it can be any of those. So if you are acting on your discrimination, on your bias or your prejudice or your stereotypes, if you're acting on those things, you're having some sort of unjust treatment, that is discrimination. Okay. Now, discrimination can have other components based on who you are discriminating against. Okay. So racism is the word that everybody tries to ascribe to everything. Okay. And it's not always racism. Sometimes it's actually something else. I had a friend who, she says, oh, they're just racist against me. And I won't say what her race was, but she was saying that. But reality was they weren't being racist. They were being sexist. She was a female. It had nothing to do with her race. It had to do with her gender is what we found out. And so we have to be careful about ascribing the wrong term to what we're saying. So discrimination is any unjust treatment. I don't care if it's because, maybe you have some sort of mental disability and people are ascribing something to you for that reason. It could be gender, it could be your age, and we'll get into ageism in just a second. And then it could be where you are from. But discrimination is typically just an unjust treatment. It's not fair. I have experienced discrimination. I have experienced it because of my gender. I have experienced it because of my disability. Believe it or not, I have one. I have experienced it because of my age. Most recently, because I'm getting older, and so I have experienced it. And believe it or not, I have actually experienced it because of my ethnic background. So I have experienced it from all different levels. You wouldn't think so. People like to throw out the word white privilege. But just remember that when you say things like that, you are definitely doing a stereotype. You have a prejudice. You are discriminating against me because of my skin as well. And then, which takes us into racism. Opinion or treatment based on a race or ethnicity. And it can go, anybody can do racism. Does not matter. We all have a race. And I hate the word white because that's not my race. My race is not a color. Black is not a race, that's a color. I prefer to say, where does your family come from? Right now there's this whole thing with Kamala where they're trying to say, what is her ethnic background, and ethnic background and race, they're not the same thing, right? So we have to be careful about what we say. Prejudice, and I'm not going to get into that because I don't want to get into politics. I'm not even going to go there because then it gets really ugly really fast. So prejudice, so let's define racism. Racism, opinion or treatment based on race or ethnicity. Prejudice or discrimination by an individual, community, or institution against a person or a people based on their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group. Now, I like to use this example because it's not as threatening or people don't get all upset as easily. I don't know if you know this, but in the 1900s, the Irish were actually defined as non-white, racially inferior group thought to be subhuman. And so they were racially discriminated against just because they were Irish. And they usually got the worst jobs. They were not allowed to do a lot of things. When it came to getting land, they were discriminated against. And so anytime the reason you're not allowing someone to do something is based on what they look like, where they come from, that's racism. So even where people come from, people don't think about that, but what's their background, that automatically that people group. And we can go back to the Okie thing to kind of make that, them not being allowed into California in some ways was kind of like racism because it's their ethnic background, where they're coming from. And a lot of, believe it or not, a lot of Okies were from Ireland. So that happened as well. So racism is the opinion or treatment based on race or ethnicity. And so Remember, the opinion is not a big deal. We all have opinions. It's in our brain. It's what we do with that that matters. So you may never get rid of your bias. You can try, but it's when you act on that. This is that point in time. Discrimination is wrong. I don't care what you are, who you are, where you come from, how you act. I don't care. You never should discriminate against people. So if you have an opinion, because racism can just be an opinion. It can go all the way back to your prejudice, right? It can go back to a stereotype that's in your head. That's fine. It's in your head. You haven't acted on it. I don't think it's great. I think you should try to work through those and get to a place to realize that God made everybody. When we get to heaven, we're all going to be there that love Jesus. So we might as well work towards that. God calls us to love everybody. It doesn't say love everybody that's in the race that you are, or love everybody that's your gender or your age. It does not say that. It says love all people. So that's what we need to do. But as long as it's just an opinion, a prejudice, it's I don't want to say it's okay, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. It's not the action yet. When it comes to discrimination, if you are a leader that is discriminating against people based on all of those things, that is a problem, and you can get fired. You can be written up. You can be sued. You can go to jail, depending on how much of that has happened. So that is something you have to start to understand, that discrimination is very bad. And we talked about racism. We also have ageism, bias, opinion, or treatment based on age. So once again, bias and opinion, you may think that, but if you actually do the discrimination on that, that is a problem. How we treat someone or discriminate based on someone's age is not okay. So that can be someone is, certain is too young. You think, oh, they're too young. They can't do that. So we're not even going to let them try, that can be discrimination. Now, there are laws in place that says you can't hire someone who is under the age of 16. It might even be 15 in some states. I'm not sure. And that's set in place for a reason. An organization that serves alcohol, they have to be 21. So those things are in place for you, so you don't even have to worry about that, right? And if you do hire people of younger age, there are also laws of how long and how many hours they can work. And so those help you out in some cases. Now, the older one is really become rampant. Like, it's becoming acceptable to push people out because of their age. I actually had a pastor say to me, and this will get into sexism too, really good friend of mine, worked with him for 30 years. We've been in ministry all along, and he said, I'd love to make you my associate pastor, but I don't feel comfortable doing that because you're a woman. And it was, and I understood that one. That was fair, because he figured that him and his associate dean, his associate pastor would need to do a lot of one-on-ones with him. And because, we're both married, he just didn't feel that was acceptable. I can go with that. I understand that. But then he said he didn't want to make me the college pastor because I was too old. And that is ageism. That's, I love college students. I work at a college as a professor. So, that's okay. God took me somewhere else and made me something else, and I'm okay with that. But this was years ago. This wasn't like right now. This was years ago. This is back when I was like 40, I think, maybe 42 or something. But I was still young enough to run around with all of the young people, and so that was kind of harmful to me in some ways, that I couldn't work with the college students. I thought that was very odd. And what's interesting is I've just been asked by another church to go be a college small group leader. So obviously I still have it in me to work with college people. So ageism is a bias, opinion, or a treatment. And the treatment comes down to when you are discriminating against someone because of their age. And so that can happen. And then the last one of those is sexism. Once again, how we treat someone based on their gender is sexism. And we see that a lot in the church that, and I have a whole sermon about women in ministry, and I don't know where you come from or what denomination you're part of. So there is a chance that maybe you hold fast to, women should not be in ministry. But I can tell you that that is definitely discrimination, and that the Bible does not back that up. Now, the New King James Bible was written with bias and discrimination, because if you look at the original Greek and Hebrew, you will find that God said all people, not men, but that was changed to men when it was written in the King James. And so it was based on a bias and a discrimination. You also see that God used women many times. The first missionary of the gospel was a woman, and during that time, for the disciples to admit that, to write that into the scriptures, was a big deal, a big hairy deal, because for them to believe the word of a woman was against their culture, which we're in an intercultural communications class where we talk about how culture affects things that happen and why they're written that way or why they're acting on that way. And so the culture of the time, of the Jewish time, is women were treated differently. However, Jesus allowed women to be part of his cohort. Now, maybe they weren't disciples in the sense that they weren't, one of the 12, but they were definitely hanging around. And like I said, a woman was the first missionary of the gospel. And let's not even forget the Samaritan woman at the well, who also, I said that wrong. She was the first missionary of the gospel. And then the first missionary of the resurrection was also a woman. And also 50% of our world is women right now, and that's 50% more people that could be sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ and winning people to Jesus. So let's not even go there. I'll get off my soapbox now. So we have to be careful of our bias, of our treatment, of our opinions, all of that, because as we go into the workplace, if we have those, we're going to treat people unjustly, unfairly, and then really we should be asking God, what is your opinion of this person? How should I treat them according to what you think? And Jesus says to love everybody. And so even if you have to reprimand them, even if you have to fire them, everything we do should be based on what they've done in work, not based on their age, their race, or their gender, or their disability. Can they do the job? And if they can, then we should treat them fairly. That's the reality. So, we're talking about culture, and every single situation is going to have a different culture. This class, because of who is in here and what backgrounds we all bring to it, what gender we are, what age we are, where we come from, our own biases, our culture is one kind of culture. If you go into some other scenario, like at your workplace, at your church, in the grocery store, or whatever, that culture constantly shifts. It's hard to define culture because it morphs as the people enter and exit, because everybody brings in a different point of view as they come in and they go out. And so it shifts, it morphs, and to define culture is almost impossible. So it is important that we understand our own biases and we deal with them, and so that we don't take it to the next level of discrimination. We need to understand ourselves. We need to know ourselves. That's why I have you all journaling as we go through this process, because I want you to be honest with yourself. Those journals are basically a chance for you to say, you know what? I do have a bias. I do have things that I need to watch out for. Maybe you've encountered someone in your life that was a certain way, and then you've attributed that to everybody after that looks like that person. My husband used to do that about a name. He knew one person with the name Rick, and he was biased against that name. And my son ended up becoming his name. We call him Ricky, and he did not want to name our kid Ricky because he knew of this guy named Rick that was a certain way. And I'm like, that's silly, because my son is actually Richard III, and I'm like, I don't want to call him Richard because my husband was called Richard, and I didn't want them to have the same name in the home, and so I really want to name him Ricky. And I finally got my way, but I had to get him to overcome his prejudice against that bias, that stereotype of that name is silly, right? And so we need to work on that. So knowing thyself, and if you talk about self comes in 3 levels. So there's a big circle. If I had a whiteboard behind me, I'd circle it for you. That's the self that everybody gets to see. the people in your workplace, your friends, your family, everybody you encounter. It's the person I get to see, okay? So the big stuff. Then you come in another level. In the second level, that's the place that only your really close people get to see, like your family, your friends, and sometimes even your friends don't get to see that one. Sometimes it's outside that. But it's the closest knit circle of people that get to see that level of you. Go back to my husband. He's actually he's an introvert, and he's kind of a funny guy, but the only people that get to see that funny guy side of him are the people that are in the second level. So very few people get to see that. I try to tell people he's funny, but they don't believe me. And then there's the center circle. And the center circle is yourself that only you and God gets to see. Now, in that center circle, sometimes is where the bias and the prejudice lie. They lie in that center circle. And that's great when they can stay there. Honestly, I'd like you to get them out of there too. And only God can help you kind of push those out and get to a place where they don't exist there anymore. But that's the secret self that when someone walks in the room, you have an instant bias. That's where it lies a lot of times. Now, sometimes you let it outside that circle and you tell your friends about that. Oh, I can't believe he da-da-da-da-da, right? And that's when it starts to get dangerous, because once it gets into the second circle, there's a chance that you might act on it. And when it gets to the outside circle, then you're called a bigot, or, there's lots of horrible names that can be attributed to you. And that's when you get yourself in trouble, because usually you're acting on it. That's why people see it outside the circles, right? Most people wouldn't know that you are those things until it's out here, and the reason why they know it's out here is because you've done something to show that. And so it's very important that you work on the inner self, that circle in the middle, working with God to really figure out, how can I get over this bias? How can I get over this prejudice, so that I do not get to a place where I'm acting on it, where I'm talking about it, where I'm saying something, where I'm doing something that is not, those things are not going to make you a great leader. A great leader can look at anybody and look at their skills, not at what they look like. That's why I have a little bit of a problem with affirmative action, because I personally want us to get to a place where we look at everybody the same. That, the only way we get rid of racism and prejudice and ageism and, all of those sexism, is if we stop saying, well, we want this person because of this. A lot of people have been kind of rough about the Secret Service that were around Trump, because the girls in that were so short that a bullet could have totally hit them. Now, go find a tough 6-foot woman and she can do the job. Don't give people the job just because they're a woman. Give people the job because they can actually do the job, right? And so they should have had really tall women, or no women at all, but and even if the guy was like 5'5", he shouldn't be doing the job either, right? It really should be people that can do the job, period. And I love that we have a diverse society. I'm the first person to say we need to have people of all cultures, all races, all genders, all ages. I think they all bring us to a place that is a much better world. And so I get excited when I see people of all of those things applying for jobs, trying to go back to school and get their doctorate, to be a leader. I love that we have a really diverse group of people in here. We have people from the military. We have people that are stay-at-home moms. We have educators. We have pastors. We have a whole group of people, different cultures, different mindsets, different, all of it. And that's what makes the best learning. I would hate to have just one thing in here. That would just make me sad, because I don't think that's culturally rich learning. So those are the things I want you to think about this week. Just a reminder, doctoral work is all about research. So everything you turn in should have some sort of research attached to it. If you're not doing research, then you will get marked down. So please, 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 please put your research in there. All right, if you have questions, I'm always welcome to answer them. If you email me, mendozak@wbu.edu, you get a faster response, unless it's after 10 o'clock Central Standard Time, because I'm in bed. but I usually will respond to those pretty quick. All right. God bless you all. You all have a great week, and I look forward to seeing what you have to say, and let's keep it friendly. All right. Bye-bye.